Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all those who have joined us from around the world. My name is Josh Truman. I'm the Vice President at Convergence.Tech, and today we have an amazing panel who will be discussing the future of learning. We will cover some important questions with a few of North America's most innovative leaders, education leaders. And our goal today is that whatever your role is in education, that you'll come away with something, a new idea, a fresh perspective, or a new strategy. So let's talk a little bit about the format to give you an idea of what to expect. We're going to take a few moments for each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their background in education and their district. And then I'll kick off the conversation by asking a few questions that draw out some of the high-level themes and trends we should be thinking about as educators. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off the introductions with Don Haddad. And if you don't mind sharing, Don, a little bit about your district and the community you serve. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. And appreciate the opportunity to join you today. My name is Don Haddad. I am the superintendent of the St. Vrain Valley Schools in Colorado. And we are currently the 7th largest school district in the state out of 178 school districts. We have approximately 33,000 students, and we're growing at a pretty fast pace. We have 60 schools, and we span out over 411 square miles. And this is I'm going into my 14th year as a superintendent here, and I'm going into my 37th year in education as a whole. And I've had the good fortune to serve in the capacity as a teacher, principal, assistant principal, and then executive director, assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent, and then again for going into my 14th year as the superintendent. And glad to join you today. So thank you.
Thank you, Don. Much appreciated. Chris.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Chris Kennedy, I'm superintendent of schools in West Vancouver, British Columbia. We have 18 schools, about 7,500 students. I'm in my 11th year here as superintendent and 26th year in education. And kind of like Don, I've done the teacher to vice principal to assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent, and now the last 11 years here as superintendent of schools.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Stuart, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Josh. I'm Stuart Miller, and I have just recently retired at the beginning of August, Director of Education, which is equivalent to the Superintendent in the United States, the Halton District School Board, which is just west of Toronto, 66,000 students, about 105 schools, 8,500 staff, and like Don, Don's in his 37th year. I just completed my 37th year and retired. And like Don and Chris, I had spent my time as a teacher, vice principal, superintendent, etc. And this is an opportunity for me to continue my love and passion for education and the significance it plays in a democratic civil society.
Thank you, Stuart, and congratulations on the retirement. That's really exciting. Peter.
No, thank you, Josh. That's why I see Stuart is the most relaxed among us, because he's retired and we're all in the middle of his school opening, or some of us have already opened up the schools. My name is Peter Singh. I'm the executive officer at Toronto District School Board. We are the largest school district in Canada. Around close to 245,000 learners come through our 582 schools. In the city of Toronto we serve. And the operating budget for Toronto District School Board is close to $3.4 billion. And out of that one, majority of 84% goes into paying salaries, and we left with 16% to run the school and provide services. And my team looks after the entire stack when it comes to technology portfolio. So we look after from ERP to the classroom facing technology and the infrastructure in between. So I'm really excited with this panel, and we have some interesting topics to share our thoughts on. Back to you, Josh.
Thank you, Peter. Well, just to get the most out of our time together, I feel we'll just start with question number one. The question is, how is education changing from a teacher practitioner perspective as well as student consumption? How are things changing? And if Stuart, do you want to kick it off for us? And we'll also hear from Peter.
Sure, Josh, I'll start and I'll take a few minutes. And I think education is always changing. It's ever evolving, as it should be. It's a dynamic, organic process that leads society but also reflects society. And so therefore it has to change with the times and lead change in the times. And I think COVID and the pandemic has accelerated some of those changes, but they're not new. I think they've been happening for many years now with mobile phones, and the mobility of the technology has changed teaching and practitioners, also from being content providers primarily to facilitators, to coaches, to helping students critically think, have developed critical skills, etc. Skills have always been important in education, but I think that is the raison d'etre for teachers and practitioners now, because content is so accessible that teachers, and the really good ones, and we in all our districts have a great many really good teachers, use the content as a vehicle to teach an entire whole child and perpetuate the skills that they need to be successful. I also think that education, certainly public education, will be tapping private business, private institutions, non-government organizations, corporations, etc., because it's we're no longer in that bubble. We're no longer the bunker mentality. It's time that we opened up a little more, and they're more receptive, and we work on the agenda together around the significance of public education. For the students, I think it's incumbent upon us to engage the students in a different way, and for the students to embrace that. And the students, I think, do embrace it more so now because they ask tougher questions. They challenge teachers to a greater extent because they do have that access to content and so on. So with that, I will turn it over to Peter, because I know the other panelists, Chris and Dawn, probably want to weigh in as well. But certainly, education is moving in a way that I believe is more reflective of the fast-paced environment and society we live in, which we'd all like to slow down somehow, but I'm not sure that's quite so possible. So, Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. Stuart and I are both in the Ontario education system. So one of the things here at Toronto District School Board, as part of our multi-year strategy, there are traditional expectations when it comes to literacy and numeracy outcomes. But we are in a global village, and we're connected to the rest of the world. And we believe that our graduates are not going to be just, when they finish their education, just competing for roles here in Ontario, Toronto, or Canada. They will be competing around the globe. So to me, the skill sets they need to compete globally are different than what they used to go for when we look 10, 15, 20 years or 50 years back. So the global competencies are a huge goal here at TDSB as part of our strategy. And along with that comes also around digital fluency, not just knowing technology piece, as you have to be really, really fluent on that front. So from a teacher and student perspective, we wanted to make sure we actually enable that learning that's not just built around the traditional 4 or 5 C's, but it goes beyond that one. How are these graduates are going to be the next generation business people? What skills do they need? The leaders, the good citizens. So we need to build the character of these ones. So the critical thinking, problem solving has to be embedded in the pedagogy, in the curriculum. It has to be natural. Also, we're seeing that teacher is not the sole custodian of knowledge anymore. It's co-creating the learning environment. And the students are sometimes also facilitating the learning for the class, for their peers also. So we are seeing a lot more what's been happening in higher ed, in college and university now, also happening more in K-12 also. And being in an urban city like Toronto, we see that a lot of knowledge sits out there in the households too. So a very powerful engagement with the parent community is a must. So we're seeing a shift where parents might have been a little bit laid back when it came to their engagement at a school level. Now we see the parent and the overall community is really engaged in what happens in their schools. So we're seeing different trends happening, and that's what's helping our learners to get ready for the future. And the teachers are actually facilitating that learning in our classroom to make things happen across the entire district.
Excellent. Peter and Stuart, thank you. Chris?
Josh, can I just add one thing? Because Peter said it, but I'll be a little more explicit. I think the learners are far more collaborative than previous generations of learners, and in working together in smaller teams because of the nature of many of the things Peter and I spoke about around content and keepers of knowledge. And we've seen it in our classrooms. Even the way we physically structure our classrooms are different than what they were. COVID changed it a little bit, but also accelerated it a little bit. The expectations on students to work together to solve problems, I think, has been enhanced and increased. So with that, I'll turn it over back to you, Josh.
Excellent. I just wanted to see if Don or Chris had any additional comments.
I think the comment that Stuart makes around sort of COVID being an accelerator is really crucial. I think one, you see students being more collaborative and on their own, going and building their own networks, especially during windows of time where there might not have been any in-person instruction in some districts. Students went out on their own and made their own connections for their own learning. And so I think, as you know, we'll talk more about COVID later, but I think that's one of those examples of something that won't. Once you've had that experience, you're not going to go back. And so I think some of those connections that our young people are making now are just very different than even a few years ago.
Thank you, Chris. Don, any closing thoughts on this question?
I don't think so. I think the three panelists have said it very, very well. I concur with everything that they've said. So
excellent. Thanks, Don.
Yeah, you bet.
So actually, Chris, you're going to be leading us on the next question. And that question is, how do we take what we've learned from COVID-19 moving forward?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we need to do about COVID and what we've learned in the last 12 to 15 months is recognize that like across North America, kids had really different experiences. Some of our students in some jurisdictions, like our students, were in class almost the entire time, while others were out of class almost the entire time. And others were, I think of my Ontario colleagues where they were in and they were out and they were in. They bounce back and forth. And so we have to be careful about sort of the generalizations about this is what happened during COVID and then this is what we learned from it, because I think we have kids coming to school this fall, mostly in person across the continent, who are coming off of very different experiences of the last 15 months. First thing I would say is that's really important is to not focus on going back to the way it used to be. And, I think we got to, this gets to the language we use around, the fall. We're not trying to return to the life of 2018-19. We're trying to take some lessons that we had and go to a new place. And, one of those lessons I think is that, we have our teaching staff that has all new digital skills that they didn't have 12 months ago. What a loss it would be if we don't find ways to continue to utilize these new skills, which were skills that we were always hoping would grow in the workforce. But with the urgency of COVID, really ramp those digital skills up for all of our staff. And so even as we return to in person, how are we making sure that we are still utilizing those digital tools and experiences on the teacher side and on the student side differently? Another one that we're thinking a lot about is how we think of time in class and have it differently and creating more what we call flexible learning time. 2 years ago, we had our teachers would count the minutes of if you had 110 hours for math, you couldn't miss 30 minutes of those 110 hours because you had them all figured out or how you were going to spend that entire time in a course. And then COVID kind of just messed that all up, and you had kids in and then out, and some were in class and some were online. And so I think we began to think differently about, well, what are the things that we actually have to do face to face, and what are some things that we can do virtually and support them, and what are things kids can do on their own or collaboratively, and all of our schedules in our high schools, really throughout the Vancouver area this year have built in some what they call flexible learning time, which is not dedicated in any individual class in high schools, but giving kids choice over where they learn, who they learn with, and the teachers. And so there's a core piece of the core curriculum that has to get taught, but then there is more choice in where kids, because not every student needs 100 hours for math. Some need 60 and some need 130. And so how do we do more of building our schedules and our timetables so that we can have that happen? And the final one I would point to is, in our survey of students over successes or failures over the last 15 months, it was striking how some people said when we went all virtual, that was the absolute worst experience of their life, and others said it was the absolute best experience of their life. And that, I think we have some broad brushes we sometimes paint the education system with the, well, everybody needs to learn online, or schooling only should happen in person. But there is uniqueness of each of our students, and that actually some students report learning better one way or the other way, and that we have to do a better job of matching how kids learn and the structures that they learn in with the structures we build for them. And so I think that's another one, is that the one size fits all in terms of our structured block systems, again, particularly in our high schools, is something that we're trying to break down and change and take the lessons that we've got over the last 15 months.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. It's exciting to hear this. COVID in general has turned into a pretty exciting opportunity for the educators in your district, and I'm sure in most of your districts as well. Don, do you have any comments to add to that question?
Yeah, I do. I appreciate the emphasis. First of all, I appreciate everything Chris said. I think he's spot on. I hope that as we move forward as an institution, public education, that we recognize that it should be the changing times that cause us to create and to innovate and to make the necessary adjustments and advancements. I have spoken in the past of major changes that were seen back in 2007 and 8, where technology and innovation, where you started to see a global environment begin to emerge. And really, those are the things that should have served as an inspiration for our public education system to advance. And so as we talk about moving forward, I hope that we're able to talk about moving forward, because that's what's required to keep our children in a place where they can compete across the globe versus reacting to a pandemic. And so it's more of a proactive response to education advancement versus a reactive response to something that happened. Because as times move quickly, we know that we can't wait for another world event before we become motivated to advance our education system.
Absolutely. Thanks, Don. Well said. Stewart, Peter, any additional comments?
Definitely. I'll thank you, Chris and Don, for sharing some of your experiences as a response to COVID. And I believe the pandemic has been a fork in the road moment in education, especially in K-12. And this new normal is our normal from here on. And part of the learning that happened is also on multiple fronts. I thought it really touched for me and my team and us as an organization. And the focus on empathy and well-being. We were living through some turbulent times, and to be connected to the humanity, living that moment, and sharing that with your peers, your colleagues, it was a key piece as we started. And to me, even my team is focused on IT. I'm pushing that well-being has to be included as part of the IT strategy itself too. It's not just HR, employee services work to do, it's everyone's work to do when it comes to well-being, because everyone was under so much stress during this pandemic. I think as your organization, you have to have the vision and the strategy in place. If you did not have that in place and your shop processes were not rock solid, you would have struggled to respond to that one. One example is if you don't have a culture built around agility, And this situation actually was hungry for that one. You had to respond quickly and fast enough to meet the needs of our learners. How do we turn every single living room or dining area into a learning pod across 200,000 families living in the city of Toronto? So we had to respond in a very timely fashion. And we also learned that the investments we were making it, and continue to do that one around digital transformation, really helped us. So we could really shut off the legacy way of servicing our clients. Students are our clients too. So are parents, teachers, administrators. So having that modern technology in place, rock solid ecosystem, and leveraging services, doesn't matter, it comes from cloud services or somewhere else, really benefited us. And we finally saw how having a good practice around leveraging data when it comes to evidence-based decision making, and providing that to the decision makers in a timely fashion, and that was huge undertaking, and people were really impressed what we were able to do when it came to providing them data in real time. And also we learned that the parent and guardian services we provide to them for engagement were really, really key for us. So we saw, when we looked at the data from parent engagement with our learning management system, we saw the growth went through by 2,900%. That's a huge undertaking during a pandemic year. And that with along comes the marketing piece, saying we as leaders need to also take that strategy, the vision we have, and turn into a marketing so others can now come along with us, so we can help other peers at a executive table to move all of us together in the same direction. I think we needed to actually do a bit more of that too. That was a learning, my own learning as part of the COVID-19 response.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. Stuart, any closing thoughts for us on this question?
Yeah, just very briefly, I agree completely with Don, Chris, and Peter. But I would add to what the last bit about Peter was saying around empathy and so on. There's an opportunity that COVID has presented this generation of students, and they have responded. By and large, across North America and Western Europe, kids have gone to school, they've looked after themselves, they've looked after each other, notwithstanding, those vocal opponents to masks and vaccines and et cetera and so on. The majority of students have still worked through their education. And I think the opportunity is this: they're in a historical moment, and these kids have had real time to develop compassion, empathy, understanding, and being able to support each other, that in many cases prior to the pandemic was almost theoretical for these students. And, before I retired, I'd be walking around some of the classes, and the way students responded, wearing masks or in some cases face shields, was remarkable to me, and looking after each other. So it has presented this opportunity that we must jump on to make a better, and I'm sorry I'm using a kind of old Soviet term, but the collective society, that we are in it together. And that's been the messaging to kids, and they've responded.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart. I really appreciate all of your kind of comments on this question, and really focusing on positivity and a positive outlook, and opening up the opportunities for what's next, which leads me to the next question, which will be for Don. And that's, how do we connect our learning models to the workforce as moving forward?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I tell you, recognizing that public education is an institution that really is charged with educating over 90% of all of the children, at least in America, over 90% of our children K through 12 attend a public school. And there are oftentimes conversations around what is the purpose of public education. And certainly there are many, many things that we cultivate and we develop and we support our children with. One of them is understanding some of the workplace demands that they will have, the changing dynamics of the workforce, and what happens in the workplace beyond just the knowledge and the skills, as Peter talked about, with empathy and support. There are a lot of nuances to preparing our children and connecting our children to be prepared. In St. Vrain, we've talked a lot about, we want our children to graduate with a strong competitive advantage. We want them to be able to seek out anything that they are passionate about, interested in, and be able to pursue that with a strong competitive advantage so that they can compete with anyone for any opportunity around the globe. And in order for that to happen, we know how important it is to create a system that by design facilitates that outcome. Oftentimes in education, we've seen within that pre-K through 12 setting, we've seen elementary schools operate and middle schools operate and high schools operate, and then colleges and universities operate, but there may have been some of a disconnect, so to speak. So establishing that pre-K through what we call a pre-K through 14 system has been really important. The other thing that I think is important in connecting to the workforce is that we move away from graduation and earning a diploma as being the singular outcome, because a high school diploma will prepare you at some level. But I don't think a high school diploma in and of itself with a traditional academic experience will prepare you for that strong competitive advantage, because things are changing so dramatically. The information flow, when you think about Moore's law and the power and the speed of microchips doubling every 24 months, you realize that a system can no longer be of success, so to speak, if we're just in rote memorizations and 7-year textbook adoption cycles. So we have built a system that we call Foundation Innovation. And it's a 2-part system where the foundation builds that strong academic core. And that includes all of the core subjects, but also all of the co-curricular subjects, the athletics, the music, the drama, the theater, the debate, all of those kinds of things, coupled with that strong academic core. But then on top of that, we build out robust innovation. And that's where you get the foundation innovation. And it takes the two of those things working together to create that strong competitive advantage. And so that's how we've created our system. We incorporate design thinking throughout our system, pre-K through 12 and pre-K through 14, because we know that the problems that our children are going to be called on to solve are problems that are constantly evolving. Consistent with COVID, we're calling on people who've graduated from our public school systems, our doctors, our scientists, all to create solutions to these really complex problems that if you don't have that ability to, empathize a problem, ideate a solution, prototype it, test it, revise it, you're not going to be able to find the solutions to the complex problems. And that's why we have to continue to expand our system. We also know that we have to look at the workforce and what are the demands. In our schools, we've set up opportunities for students to pursue STEM, for them to pursue aerospace, for them to pursue the International Baccalaureate programs, leadership, the medical and biosciences programs, the energy programs, all of these things that we know are driving the economy and the workforce. We also have to provide opportunities as we connect to the workforce for the career and tech education programs. We built out an advanced manufacturing program that really focuses on things like 2-year certifications and badging programs and mentoring programs and internships, where students can take a 2-year program and earn their certificate in places like welding and optics and electronics and all of these things that we know are just as important as what we may have seen in a 4-year degree program. So they're both equally important and provide opportunities for our children, to continue to focus. We have a lot of kids involved in the machining programs and the welding and the optics and the electronics, as well as those traditional core programs. I think there are other things that we can do in terms of preparing kids for technology. We know that technology is going to be an integral part of any workforce. And so it's important that we balance textbooks and technology and the ability to learn virtually, the ability to experience things like artificial intelligence and virtual reality and augmented reality, and how to navigate and break down the 4 walls of a classroom, and to be able to interact with other children across the globe through the use of technology. The tool itself, the device, it's not going to replace a teacher, but it is going to make an already really good teacher a great teacher if we can capture technology in a way that continues to advance our students. We've built out our robotics programs, and I think it's critically important for kids to engage, just as they have for years in competitive sports, to engage in competitive robotics and understand how robotics are going to, in some cases, replace people in the workplace, which I don't think they will ever fully replace them, nor do I think they should. But understanding the dynamics of robotics is going to be, really, really important. And this all has to be aligned to our colleges and universities so that we're not experiencing a disconnect from preschool all the way through. We've outlined and implemented our P-TECH programs, Pathways Through Technology. It's a 2-year associate degree in partnership with IBM and other major corporations and community colleges, where our children can earn 2-year degrees. We have 3 programs now. One is in computer information systems. A second is in the biomedical field. And the third and most new program is in cybersecurity. And these lead kids right into the workforce, making $60,000 or $70,000 a year without incurring all of that debt. And again, I think there's a place for both, the 4-year, the 2-year, the certification programs, all of those things. And then back to what Peter mentioned, we have to pay attention to those things like leadership and communication and empathy and hard work and resilience, all of the things that we know are going to come to play day to day in our workforce. There's a lot more I could say, but I will pause there.
Thanks, Don. I really appreciate that. And it's great to hear of all the exciting things happening in St. Vrain. I've followed the work that you've been doing for quite some time. So exciting to kind of share the knowledge. And I think I'd like to pass it over to Mark. I know Mark is doing some fantastic work when it comes to connecting his learning model to the workforce. And Mark, if you wouldn't mind, just quickly introduce yourself for the group and please chime in.
Thanks, Josh. Good to see everybody. Sorry for my late arrival. We're trying to find 25 bus drivers before we start school tomorrow. So my apologies. Mark Hansen, Superintendent for the School District of Elmbrook, which is located just to the west of Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the United States. It's a suburban school district, 16th largest in the state of Wisconsin, and really working hard at trying to figure out what the lessons will be from the pandemic and then how we're going to come out of it better than we went into it.
Excellent. And to put you on the spot a little bit, Mark, I'm really interested in hearing about the work happening in Elmbrook, connecting your learning model to the workforce in your community.
Yeah, like Don, I think many of us have stories of where we're trying to innovate and do things differently. The work that we're trying to do is really prepare our regional economy with a skilled workforce that could go on to college if they wanted to, or could go right into the workplace if the jobs were there for them and have access to a middle-class lifestyle. So we have some programs that are allowing our regional economy to collide with high school age students to invent, create, and rethink in a variety of different fields, from technology to lithium batteries. We're the home of Milwaukee Tool, which is a massive innovator in the lithium battery space. To GE Healthcare, and just really trying to create collisions with the regional economic leaders and try to help solve their workforce dilemmas. I was listening to one of our colleagues in the private sector, and he described what has been for a number of years now a criticism of education and the skills gap. Some of you may have heard about the skills gap. He said it's really transitioned from a skills gap problem to a body count problem. We just don't have enough people to fill the jobs that are in our current economic conditions. Our economy in our region of this country is roaring, and every industry is looking for more people. So how do we create opportunities to rapidly accelerate workforce development? And how does technology play a hand in that? I think the EdTech solutions that will help us solve some of these challenges are going to do a couple different things locally, and then certainly I think globally. If you look at globally, there's over 250 million kids that don't have access to high quality education on a regular basis. And will EdTech solutions help us start to break down some of those barriers to quality education, regardless of what country you live in or what zip code you live in? Access to digital textbooks, to digital libraries, access to language translations. All of that stuff is speeding up really, really rapidly. So certainly EdTech solutions will be a part of it. As has been mentioned, I think data science and big data continue to disrupt our industry. And it will help us enhance learning for kids and kids who have obstacles to learning that might be special education based. You combine that with machine learning and AI, and I think the possibilities are endless to customize and personalize instruction for kids and make it 24/7 on demand, anytime, anywhere, because not all kids learn at 8 o'clock in the morning as well as they might learn at a different hour of the day. So can it be accessible in a different way? I think technology is going to allow us to talk about more immersive learning experiences. Has been mentioned, virtual, augmented reality, mixed reality. All of those are next up technology disruptions and can really bring a lesson around a topic that might have been dry to some, not to me, Jamestown or ancient Mesopotamia as a former history teacher. Could the virtual augmented reality bring those lessons alive in a way that we've never seen before and spark engagement and interest? Another bucket I think technology is going to probably disrupt is how autonomous and adaptive software can be leveraged to help kids who aren't there quite yet. I think of some of the software that's in the mathematics space, some of the rule-based curriculums that you can test and assess and reteach using algorithms as opposed to just moving on to the next lesson. In essence, we're on the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution, and it's a really amazing time to be an educator. This is our time, right? We are watching innovation and risk-taking happen at levels that I've never seen in my nearly 30-year career. A super exciting time to be thinking about how we get kids to learn, unlearn, and relearn, because they, as Don said, they need to have a strong competitive advantage in this global economy. So super exciting time, and thanks for having me, Josh. Back to you.
Thanks, Mark. Any quick closing thoughts on connecting learning models to the workforce?
I find it really interesting that while we're sort of on the, some of the skills are becoming more global, a lot of this workforce conversation is very localized. Like the industries that Don and Mark talk about are local for their community, and we're seeing that too as well. Depending on the specific needs of regions and of specific communities. It speaks to this sort of this positive tension, I think, between there's a set of global skills and a sort of globalization of learning, while also a hyper local factor at play in terms of just how we design programs to meet the needs of our specific communities.
I also would add, and Chris, thank you for that comment because it ties in. I would also add that it's important for us to really embrace partnerships with our business and our corporate sector. We have really found that we have a lot of learning opportunities as we've invited some of our major corporations and businesses to serve on curriculum advisory committees to help mentor our students, to help us develop programs and plans that really do tie into the workforce demands. There's no better way than I can think of to find out how to connect to the workforce than to actually invite the workforce into your system and have them coach and guide and direct and learn. And they too have learned from us. And I think it's a great relationship. We have over 95 business and corporate partners in St. Vrain, and I have benefited from working with all of them, learning all the time. The things they've taught us and our children are really, really beneficial.
And can I just add to that, Josh?
Please.
I really like Don and Mark's opening responses around this, because I think we were doing the same things. The terminology or the semantics are different, but essentially it's the same thing. But Don's last comment, I think many of us have argued for a long time that education is not in a vacuum. It's not just the confines of those who have teaching degrees and working in public education. And we need to expand out. We were certainly doing it in ours. But I also, and I don't know, Don, and the culture, there's a cultural shift that needs to occur in public education somewhat in Ontario, because there's still this fear of the corporate partners that they're going to come in and try to dictate or tell or whatever and try to set the agendas. So as I absolutely agree with Don around that, but I think it also poses a challenge for us to change the cultural paradigm around education somewhat, and perhaps the corporate cultural paradigm as well around working with public education.
Thank you, Stuart.
Just wanted to quickly jump in what Stuart touched on it. I believe sometimes we create these policies in education and school boards, which become hurdles for what we're trying to do to bring private partnerships to the learning table itself too. I believe now our schools are ready for environments, what we call on the technology side, hackathons. And these should be natural celebrations. The kids needed to understand that you can't solve problems alone. You need key people, part of your team, doesn't matter. It's a programmer or marketing person or a presenter or a leader itself forming those teams. So they start to experience what the workforce out there looks like and trying to solve problem. Watching grades 6, 7, 8 doing hackathons and addressing climate challenges, it blows your mind away. Is these kids really capable of doing this one? But you know, in that room, there's the future world leader sitting in there who's going to actually solve these problems for us. So I think we needed to open up a bit, but I agree with Stuart that sometimes we create these policies as a school boards and we live by them where external partners can't come into the classroom. So I think we need to open up a bit more and make sure we bring these opportunities to our kids in the classroom. Back to you, Josh.
Josh, one thing I'd like to add too is as we look at some of the things we've been talking about, assessment always drives, in many cases, I should say, drives our instruction. And in order for all of these things to happen that we're talking about, I think it's important that everybody take a close, deep dive into their accreditation systems to ask the question, is our accreditation system, is it facilitating? Is it contributing to? Is it inspiring these things? Or is it limiting? And over the years, we've evolved both as a world and hopefully as an education system. And yet much of our accreditation system is dependent on a singular exam. Now, I don't in any way, shape, or form mean to imply that we should eliminate the testing process or anything like that. I do think it requires a balancing act, though. And we need to make sure that our entire system is not being assessed based on tests when all of these other things that we're talking about are critically important. And we need to make sure that we expand the way we define quality schools and expand the way we define quality teaching, because it's much more complicated than a standardized test by itself.
I totally agree with you, Don. And the comments were fantastic. This was definitely the cake winner so far. We do have a short period of time left, and I really do feel like this question is important. And I want to pass it over to Mark again to talk a little bit about some emerging technologies you're going to be using moving forward.
I think I touched on it a little bit. I think what we know today isn't going to be what we know into the future. And as ed tech continues to evolve and shift towards AI and Internet of Things, I don't know what's possible, but certainly keeping a finger on the pulse of ed tech is going to be worth any educator's time. I think the algorithm-based software products that help kids learn language, learn mathematics, learn other rule-based curriculum, it's going to be fascinating to watch how that can extend into places that don't have access to high-quality education. We're fortunate. We're able to provide our kids access to some of those softwares. And what we found is kids want to learn all day long, not just at school. And whether it's on a math software, that they're going home and they're working on software on a screen for hours. And how do we find that sweet spot where screen time and whole child development is prioritized? Because we've all been on screens for 18 months nonstop. I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in many more Zooms or Google Meets calls. Those get a little old, right? But how are we going to help kids understand that there is a human element that we need to pay attention to as well? So, Josh, that was a really roundabout way of saying we know what technology we're using right now. We know it's meeting the needs of our kids right now, but what's coming is going to be pretty awesome, I think.
Thanks, Mark. I think with an eye on the clock, Peter, can you kind of bring us home with the conversation around emerging technologies?
Some of the pieces I see, I think we're going to really benefit from is I see predictive analytics has a huge benefit to us in education. And when you take that one and AI and machine learning behind the scene, and now you can bring digital assessment, almost real-time assessment. A combination of that one, I think, will help us to start putting together adaptive learning models. So we should be able to identify early enough for an individual learner what will work best. So we know, and sometimes we miss that opportunity for 1 or 2 years by the time we get to it, that this child needs this kind of adaptive learning or personalized learning that needs to be in place for this individual. And I think the technology can help us to close that gap. And actually empowering the teachers in a real time to have access to that kind of data where they can slice and dice themselves to understand which learner in their classroom needs what kind of approach itself to. I think the technology can help us enable and do that. And some things are here, and we wanted to see how we can leverage that in education when it comes to infrastructure around 5G and what kind of impact that will have in our IoT strategy. Mark touched base on itself too. So these are some of the pieces, but I think these last 5 years and the next 5 years to me is literally golden years in education, because I never saw the big players in technology focused on the classroom. But now I see all the big players are actually focused on the classroom. They want to catch these kids early. And we in education are really benefiting from that focus and reaping the benefits. And end of the day, any service provider or vendor that walks through my doors, I always challenge them, how are you investing in education, especially in K-12? Because if you invest now, we as a big economy will reap the benefits of that investment. So we have seen some really good partners come to the table and bring expertise, money, and resources to make things happen in our classrooms. So I do see a big shift when it comes to tech companies right now investing in K-12 for us. Back to you, Josh.
Thanks, Peter. And I'm sure we could continue the conversation for a couple more hours, but we do have to wrap it up. And I just want to wrap it up by saying, on behalf of Convergence.Tech, as well as personally, I really appreciate the time you're taking today, but I really appreciate the insights, the outlook, and your leadership through a time that has been more challenging than any other time in education. So thank you and kudos to you, and keep up the good work. And Stuart, enjoy your retirement. And again, guys, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.